For the second day running, about 500 pickets clashed with police outside Scotland's biggest pit, Bilston Glen. Forming a human wedge, they slowly advanced on police lines, but were held. Several of the miners in the vanguard were snatched out and arrested, and for the first time at Bilston Glen, handcuffs were used to restrain struggling pickets. The miners withdrew, then surged forward again. But this time the police, outnumbered around 2 to 1, pushed the pickets 50 yards further from the main gate. There were more arrests. After police appeals to the NUM, no stones were thrown, unlike yesterday when scores of windows were broken. Today's only missile, a stink bomb, narrowly missed television crews, who were regularly subjected to threats of violence. One miner with chest injuries was helped from the melee and taken to hospital, and there were other less serious injuries amongst pickets and police. 25 miners went into work over and above the safety men sanctioned by the unions. There was more violence this afternoon and 9 arrests, taking the total for the day to 33.
There was a complete blockade of the Humber Bridge this morning. 600 miners abandoned cars on approach roads and brought chaos to rush hour traffic. 3-mile tailbacks soon built up, and police, caught unawares, were unable to clear protesters for 2 hours. There were angry exchanges between miners and public, and 2 police cars were wrecked. 27 miners were arrested, but there were no injuries. The men had been thought to be heading for the Scunthorpe Steelworks, but stopped here when police spotted their convoy. Eventually, reinforcements arrived, and the blockade was dispersed. By mid-morning, the bridge was back to normal, although there were several smaller incidents between police and pickets elsewhere on the Humberside motorway system.
The violence at the Port Talbot Steelworks in South Wales began with grass fires burning in a number of places. Setting light to the tinder-dry embankments was, said the police, a new and irresponsible tactic. Motorway speed restrictions had to be imposed. Meanwhile, pickets, including many women, tried to block the main entrance to the works just before a convoy was due to leave. The violent scuffles broke out as police reinforcements began to clear a way through. Police making arrests found themselves attacked by other miners, and by the end of the day there had been 34 arrests. 7 were women, although the police claimed they weren't all miners' wives. The picketing failed and soon the convoy was underway, hindered only by the thick smoke.
In Switzerland, it's very rare for an elephant to be born in captivity. Like all newborns, Celia found it hard to find her feet at first, and the glare of publicity wasn't exactly helping things. But after a few false starts and with some encouragement from her keepers, Celia finally stood tall to face one very proud mother. That's it. Good night from us.
Mr. Morgan may have slipped into work unnoticed, but pickets were waiting as he left. Miners' wives confronted the police escort first.
Leave him walk out. He's a man, a big man. Leave him walk out.
As police held back the pickets, rocks started to fly and officers flung themselves across him until the bus was clear of the pit. The fighting and the arrests went on. At the Morgans' home, 5 miles away, strikers and their families laid siege to the house. Mr. Morgan's wife Sheila requested a police guard for the night. She backs her husband's action.
But it's not now, he's getting protection now. Police protection and all the rest of it. But when this is over, it's a hell of a life for him, isn't it?
Striking miners will stay outside the Morgans' house all night, ready for when he leaves for the morning shift tomorrow. Anne Lucas, News at 10, South Wales.
Non-disciplinary measures against...
The security forces were determined that if American IRA fundraiser Martin Galvin appeared, he would not escape a second time. The police led the way as the march headed off along the Falls Road from the Sinn Féin headquarters. At Andersonstown, there were more police waiting. The trouble started with stones being thrown. The response from the police was immediate. Sinn Féin leader Gerry Adams led the speeches, which followed, and then he announced Galvin. Driving into the crowd and firing plastic bullets as they waded in, the police went to seize the American. What followed was hysteria and panic as the crowds lay down in the road to escape the bullets. Women and children screamed and huddled together for safety. Many people were hit. The police say one man died at the scene. Some people had tried to revive him after he was struck in the chest by a plastic bullet. Eventually, the police went into the Sinn Féin office looking for Galvin, but they said a few moments ago he had not been arrested. Colin Baker, ITN, Belfast.
Working miners across the picket lines have been burnt out in an arson attack at Pleasy Valley. The buses were worth £30,000.
The miners were attempting to block the access road to the pit, and they succeeded.
Come on, take your bloody pictures now!
Police came under a hail of missiles from a group of miners who disobeyed strict NUM instructions.
Go on, film them.
Then, in an angry reaction, police drew their truncheons and charged. 4 pickets were injured, and 19 police, though none seriously. Afterwards, the pickets accused the police of drawing their truncheons before any missiles were thrown. 2 hours after Mr. Green was due to clock on, they dispersed, knowing their picket had served its purpose. When the working miners' van finally arrived, the shift was nearly over. The NCB said only 2 hours' work was completed. The NUM can term this as a successful picket, and that's a worrying development both for the police and the coal board.
The RUC patrols. The police didn't fire back, although they did use plastic bullets against rioters. There were 24 arrests and 14 policemen were injured. It's not clear what started the violence. One theory is that it was a reaction to a loyalist Supergrass who's giving evidence in a Belfast court. So far, he's implicated 47 people on terrorist charges.
A scrapyard broken into provided the basic barricade material. 3 built quickly across the road past Silverwood pit. Cars were dragged from the scrapyard, trees chopped down and supermarket trolleys added to the pile. The police had expected trouble here, and it started in the early hours. About 1,000 police were in the area, and as they moved in, they were met by a hail of bricks, stones, pickaxe handles and bits of concrete lamppost. The response was to chase pickets through a housing estate. The mood was ugly, and there was determined action on both sides. Pickets mostly thought the better of having a straight fight, but there were over a dozen police and a dozen pickets injured, though none seriously. Many pickets melted into the mist, pursued by mounted police. The pit itself was relatively quiet, the one working miner, a 48-year-old electrician, having slipped in with a police escort before dawn. The debris of the morning backed up reports that a considerable scrap took place in the fog-shrouded woods near the pit, where 3 men were arrested. The man whose return to work fueled the anger at Silverwood left mid-morning to yells of abuse. There's no sign that he or his striking colleagues are heading for a change of mind.
At the Hatfield plant, also in South Yorkshire, there was another large picket.
1 man had returned to work at Hatfield, near Doncaster, brought out a large part of the community. His name was quickly learned. Eric Parker, a machine man living just down the street. The police reinforced their numbers. Branch Secretary Peter Curran then returned to say that Parker had changed his mind and decided to rejoin the strike. A forceful argument from Curran and another official headed off the less forgiving elements in the crowd. Mr. Parker then began a long walk out of the pit.
Yeah, bastard! That's it, leave it, let go.
He was clearly under great pressure, having had to face the people he works and lives with. The jeers were mixed with some cheering, whether for his decision to go to work this morning or rejoin the strike this afternoon, no one would say.
The Durham coalfields, 60 members of the union's white-collar branch reported for work at Wearmouth Colliery in Sunderland for the third consecutive day. Police were taking no chances of a recurrence of earlier violence and were massed to hold back the pickets as the men went into work. The bus had arrived more than an hour and a half late because of difficulty in getting a driver. A few strikers did manage to get through police lines, and there were 8 arrests. Later, union officials tried to persuade the 16 to leave the colliery, but their branch secretary, who led the men in, remained unrepentant.
It's merely a way of bringing the message.
Around 40,000 students and schoolchildren are boycotting classes today in protest at the elections.
And that opposition has even come from leading members of the NUM. On one occasion, the president of the Nottinghamshire miners, Ray Chadburn, got upset when he thought the media was implying that he was against the strike.
Take the bloody things away!
Amendment carries on about whether television has been fair. It's an argument that will last even longer than the strike itself.
Police with riot gear were brought in. The pickets smashed windows and overturned cars belonging to the bridge. The local picket had a broken leg and another a broken arm because of attacks by police with truncheons. At Wearmouth in Sunderland, police outnumbered about 600 pickets, but they almost lost control when the pickets blocked the entrance to stop 11 supervisors going into work. They got in anyway, although there were 5 fewer of them than earlier this week. The injured, 1 policeman and 2 miners. Kiverton Park Colliery has become the South Yorkshire miners' main target after 6 men returned to work earlier this week. 700 pickets were outside. Inside, the official picket talked to the strike breakers.
But I'm ashamed of you, absolutely ashamed on this, David.
But they failed to persuade the men to turn round.
Planning and do it. Ban on geo.
Water skiers don't usually graduate to the dizzy heights of monoskiing until they've had plenty of practice. But for 17-year-old Debbie Sims, it was one ski or none right from the start. Bone cancer 3 years ago meant the amputation of her left leg. She took to the sport like a duck to water, but strangers still find it improbable.
They just don't believe me. Yeah, they say, have you got one leg? So I'll say, yeah. And when they see me, they're just amazed.
Debbie's the youngest member of the 6-strong British disabled water skiing team. Half of them blind, the others with missing limbs, who are competing in the World Championships in Norway later this month.
The return to work under heavy police guard of 23 of Tilverston's striking workforce has turned one of the calmer corners of Britain's coalfields into the latest battlefield between police and pickets. This morning, hours before the dissenting miners actually arrived for work, the police force at the colliery gate made a determined move to push the growing crowd of pickets away from the narrow country approach road. But as policemen dragged individual miners from the crush, apparently at random, there were violent struggles. Soon afterwards, heavy police reinforcements arrived by the coach and van load, and inside the gates, in full view of the pickets, they proceeded to kit themselves out with riot helmets and shields. By the time the working miners arrived, embedded in their coach in a fast-moving convoy of police cars and vans, the pickets were so heavily outnumbered that they confined themselves to the customary shouts of anger.
Throughout the day, there had been a strong, blustery crosswind at Farnborough, always a hazard for pilots. But when Bill Loverseed took the Buffalo up for its 2-minute display, there was no sign that anything was wrong until he made a steep approach to show off the plane's ability to land on very short airstrips. Almost immediately, it was clear he was descending too quickly.
Dash 7 coming back. Tom Appleton, running in.
The fact that there was no prolonged fire was partly because display aircraft carry very little fuel aboard.
Sharpville, after what seems now to have been the worst day of violence here in 8 years. Again, to live ammunition today. The last resort, they say, in the face of the continuing violence. The people here are maintaining their work and school strikes, prompt rioters again today, firing tear gas from their cars to disperse stone-throwing mobs. All day they've ranged through the township, damping down but not quelling the violence.
The repression was violent. It's 11 years since the military took power in Chile, and there's no sign yet of democratic reforms demanded by almost all the country's political groups. One year ago, when street protests against the government began to get violent, it was thought the regime of General Pinochet might not hold out. But the opposition parties have since lost the momentum they had created. And they're divided. The opposition now wants to revive the protest movement. Barricades have already begun to go up in outlying suburbs of Santiago, and there's expected to be more violent scenes during the night.
Police reinforcements were called in when the marchers were confronted by several hundred Orangemen, among them dozens of Northern Ireland loyalists. The jeers and taunts soon turned to violence, and the police had to charge into the crowd to stop the fighting. Most of those arrested have been charged with breach of the peace, and it's expected they'll be appearing in court on Monday. Although the police did their best to keep the rival groups apart, there were times during the fighting that streets had to be closed to traffic. Most of those injured during the march were hit by stones and beer cans.
This miner is on his way home through a reception committee which waits for him every afternoon in a children's playground.
I hope you turn round and say I was one of the scabs!
Jimmy Larby's one of about 170 men who daily cross the Shirebrook picket line. His neighbours are on strike. The men who are on strike spend much of their time at the local NUM office in this alleyway. It resulted in 12 arrests. When the police made the arrests, this was the reaction from the crowd of miners and a young girl.
Hey, what are you fucking doing? Take her away!
We wondered whether our cameras had any influence on the situation, but similar confrontations have happened in Shirebrook recently when no cameras were present. The outside police forces who the miners accuse of brutality will move on when the strike is over.
If you can make an
Of the talks between Ian McGregor and Arthur Scargill, the legacy of the past 6 months will live on in Shirebrook. The children.
You live over here. I go to the sisters, do you mind? I said you live over here. I go to the sisters, do you mind? Stay there.
The parents will keep telling the children to say this, say that. They're going to remember and keep saying it.
Rosine Barton was building their own had windows smashed. The attackers had thrown bricks through the windows. Rosine Barton's sister lives next door. Her house received the same treatment, although this family has nothing to do with the pit.
шахтерам Англии. Это весомый вклад в дело пометку. Фонд помощи.
Militia outside Warsaw Cathedral last year have become familiar on Western TV screens, but such material is never shown here. Such uneven treatment inevitably creates scepticism when the authorities in the West are branded repressive.
Exchange, it was business as usual. At St Paul's, the front entrance was cordoned off, but bemused tourists were directed to a side door. If the intention had been to stop the city, then today's protest had failed miserably, and there was no repetition of...
By now a small but determined group of men posing a threat and forcing a rare retreat from the police. Afterwards, both sides blamed one another for the violence.
It was ice cream and jelly and paper hats for Ben and the other children who've had transplants at Addenbrooke's. There were far more photographers than partygoers, but most of the children are now used to the glare of publicity. Ben's namesake, though no relation, Andrew Hardwick, had a liver transplant earlier this year. Before the operation, he wasn't expected to live to his first birthday. Now, he's a healthy 3-year-old. But Ben hasn't been 100% fit recently. He was in Addenbrooke's with a viral infection until last week, and his liver still isn't normal.
He's very well at the moment. Very well.
What do you reckon, Debbie? Is he...
Yeah, I think he's well. He's running around playing and... Yeah,
he's been tapping into some lunch, I see.
Yeah, he likes his yoghurt. It's treat day, hospital day. He has his funny faces and things that he likes, you know.
What about reports that he might have to have a second transplant?
They're not talking about doing one now. I mean, it's nothing... Everybody that has a transplant may have to have a second one at some time or other.
Ben and his fellow partygoers and their parents certainly had a lot to thank the hospital for today, but mainly, surely, for giving the children many more years of parties to look forward to.
And the main points of the new...
Then a noose was lowered directly from the leader.
It was a very long rope.
In real life, they rarely do.
Ja? Je hebt grootspraak.
Maar wees je dat je nu trapt?
Ja, je lijkt kom. Je lijkt kom.
Heren. Returning to Samot.
McGill stopped the column of pickets. Chief Superintendent John Nesbitt moved in immediately. The manhandling lasted 18 seconds, but Mr. Scargill was under arrest. The superintendent's version was branded a lie, but Mr. Nesbitt insisted he acted to prevent a potentially dangerous situation.